Everybody, August 20th, 2025, here with your daily recap video. Today, the market was fairly weak yesterday, and then this morning it was a super violent, aggressive sell-off right at the open. Just very, very aggressive right at the open. And just about everything followed suit. Obviously, the notable name Palantir, working on 6 days in a row, down 25% off the highs in 6 days, from 190 down to basically $140, 50 point, slip there effectively off of those highs. And, you're kind of coupling that with the NASDAQ pulling back and everything at the open, Tesla, NVIDIA, A-Lab, Reddit, you name it. Same exact price action right at the open. And, I kind of tweeted a little bit about this. It's one thing when the market acts weak and you've got a name showing some relative strength. And to that, I kind of made another little tweet where DraftKings was catching my eye. The market was slipping at the open. DraftKings absolutely did not budge. Didn't budge yesterday, didn't budge today, and then obviously closed on the highs as the market, was able to bounce right from that morning washout. So it's one thing when you've got some weakness in the market and then you've got relative strength in a stock, right? That kind of helps you gauge what has the potential to actually go higher if the market begins to turn up. And then on the flip side of that, when the market bounces, what hangs out near lows, that's how you can gauge what's got some relative weakness and potentially wants to go lower. Good example is DraftKings that I just mentioned. Not only did it really have a hard time going down yesterday, held in there really well and held its, 10 and 20 day. Today, when the market was washing out in the morning, looked nothing like NVIDIA, looked nothing like Tesla, looked nothing like AppLovin, looked nothing like A-Lab, looked nothing like Palantir, looked nothing like SMCI, looked nothing like MSTR, and on and on and on and on, right? You get that morning washout, and then, DraftKings is hanging in there. That helps you kind of judge what potentially has relative strength going forward. If the market, finally starts to turn up, volatility starts to die out a little bit, and DraftKings can maybe give you a nice little clean move higher without too much volatility or in a nice strong market. Okay, fine. But what happens when everything washes out and then everything bounces in unison, right? It skews some of your edge, which is kind of what I was relating to in that tweet. So it becomes difficult to sit there and say, oh, well, what's got relative strength? Of course, there are names that refuse to lose ascending moving averages at all, like Futu. Comes right down into the 20 on earnings, boom, explosion higher, effectively hanging out right at 52-week highs. That's great. Obviously, there are some energy names like Dino, for me, fairly impressive. Nobody's talking about oil and gas, and this name's above its 200, flagged out, continuing higher, far and few between in that sector. And obviously stocks within the XLP ETF, this absolutely monster base that I kind of tweeted about yesterday, all of the names that none of us want to own, right? Your Walmart of the world, your Costco trying to reclaim the 200 and get going. And then, maybe some of your beverage names, although Pepsi kind of had a ugly down move when they said, they were going to be raising their prices 10%. But you get the point, right? Your cigarette companies, MO, just an absolute monster from the earnings breakout. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful continuation from this long base. So, you kind of look at this long base, you look at the breakout, and you go, yep, that makes sense. You look at the XLP, and you think, hey, what, could this be ready to break out and then have a nice sustained run? Maybe, which is kind of why I joked that our grandparents will be outperforming the crypto, the crypto bros pretty soon with a base like this. But my point here is to say that, at least for me, there is some edge that's gone when everything is moving in unison. Yes, some names bounced right at their 20. If you were prepared for them, great. Some names undercut a prior low. If you were prepared for that, great. Some names broke their 50 and reclaimed it. If you were prepared for it, great. The way I viewed it is this is just a lot of volatility. The NASDAQ continues to be crowded. Maybe there's going to be rotation. Some of these most recent names, I've kind of been comparing NVIDIA to potentially Apple. You kind of get this frozen rope just above the 20 coming into earnings, breaking below the 20 after, a really sustained $2 trillion market cap move higher. And then, I was kind of doing a little bit of math on Apple in 2023, and I believe I came up with like 1.2 trillion roughly dollar move from the lows to the highs, right? Where you're just kind of steady grinding frozen rope, above the 200, and then obviously led to a breakdown on earnings, and then a really sustained period of just sideways action before eventually going to make a newer high. But when everything is kind of moving in unison and in lockstep, it's hard to find the stocks that are showing relative strength, because when everything's bouncing together, right? I was able to kind of get an eyeball on DraftKings when the market's washing out in the morning, everything's washing out, and DraftKings isn't budging. That makes you go, okay. And then obviously it closes at highs because it was showing relative strength early in the day. The market, bounces in the afternoon effectively all day, and DraftKings closes at high, right? That isn't too much of a surprise. What begins to also then catch your eye is when the market's bouncing and Apple refuses to catch a bid, right? When you're at Apple here and I'm watching this thing and I'm like, okay, all right, here comes Apple. It's going to bounce. Nope, rejects VWAP. And then it just hangs out near the lows of the day and it's making a new low. And I'm over here like, that's kind of odd, right? So if the market were to begin to roll over, part of me is already sitting there saying Apple's showing some relative weakness. How long does that last? I really don't know, but that's kind of how you train your eye. When the market's going up, the best stocks in the world are also going up. When they're not going up, the relative strength line's falling. When the market's falling and the stock isn't budging with the rest of the universe of stocks, right? If you're looking at the Qs, you're focused on tech names. If you're looking at gold, you're focused on the miners. If you're looking at crypto, you're focused on the crypto names. If you're looking at, the S&P 500, what sector within that's acting well, et cetera. So, it was same thing with Microsoft. The market started to bounce and MSFT, and Microsoft again hanging out right at the lows and hugging the 50 simple moving average. You would have expected that it would have been a hammer bar like everything else in the market, right? You look at it, ALAB, Reddit, AppLovin, Palantir. I mean, just everything had that, upside reversal. Now, some of these names, for the most part, still finished in the red. Yes, Palantir had a little bit of a pop in after hours to technically finish out, the after hour session in the green. But you lose some edge when everything is bouncing in unison, because you don't know if it's just market related or the stock is actually showing relative strength for its own reasons, outside of market conditions. And so personally for me, when I still think about the NASDAQ, you kind of get a nasty 2-day move down, and, could that have just been the NASDAQ was so crowded long that, you just had a little bit of unwinding of positioning. I think that's possible. But then when you V-shape recover like this, I was hearing some, people say, shorts got paid, and this is them just covering. I don't think so. Because there aren't many shorts in the NASDAQ to begin with, unless they were just there for a 2-day fade, basically, and then covering before Jackson Hole on Friday. Fine, I guess. But the way positioning was before this week started is, again, very, very long positioning on the NASDAQ, probably still some more unwinding to do. But if you get into a washout scenario today and then they just rebuy the dip, positioning's really not going anywhere. And if people are just going to buy the dip and buy the dip and buy the dip, eventually, people kind of run out of money to continue to buy the dip. With that said, not very surprising, once again, that the NASDAQ, with its heavy long positioning, was outperformed by the Russell. Yes, they were all down today, but the Russell lost less than the NASDAQ, and the Russell is most shorted. So when you kind of think about it from that perspective, the Russell's most shorted. If you're running a long Russell, short NASDAQ book, right, doesn't have to be some big position, your whole portfolio, nothing like that. But if the Russell comes down and the NASDAQ goes down more, you'll still have made money on that trade. And if the Russell's going up and the NASDAQ goes up a little bit less, right, you'll still have made money on that trade. And until positioning's neutral, I still think that is probably the right idea, and continues to be the right idea. I am personally looking for a little bit bigger of a push in the NASDAQ, so I can short the NASDAQ and buy the TNA. But we'll see. Like I said, I lose some of my edge when I can't find what's showing relative strength on the bounce when everything's bouncing. But when everything is bouncing, my eyes really catch on to the fact that an Apple and a Microsoft are not bouncing, and there are other names, that didn't finish up with those nice tail bars. But effectively, everything was the same today, from Palantir, to Hood. Every one of these names has this, tail bar. And again, just look at your NQ tail bar, right? You've got this nice little, or what someone will say, a hammer candle. And that's fine, but what the hell was actually showing relative strength out there when they all had these hammer bars? In fact, everything's just super highly correlated to the NASDAQ if you're a tech name, which makes sense. But, what of these names actually want to continue higher? Or are you just of the opinion that, hey, you know what, the NASDAQ's made a 44% move, we pull down 4%, and that's it, that's the lows, we're about to go make a new all-time high? I think that's fine too. But, I recently just got stopped out of Hood yesterday, Tesla yesterday. I closed the last of my Oklo, and even Oklo, right? Another little hammer bar on this one too. But I wouldn't have been too comfortable holding this thing all the way down to $60. I had a 58 average, so was plenty happy getting rid of it yesterday. I had very small size, but I don't want to give away every single last red cent that I made on the thing, even on the smallest piece of my shares. So ultimately, that's kind of what happened today. Some of the very best names, your GEV pulled into the 50, nothing really wrong with it. Your Palantir undercut the 50 and then reclaimed on a pretty big piece of volume. But I want to kind of discount this just a little bit because everything looked just like that today. So, what are some of the best looking setups? I don't think anybody really wants to own Walmart. Like I said, I don't think anybody really truly wants to get into Costco. I don't know that a lot of people want to own Monster, right? This is just not, the sexy names that people have been used to plowing into for the last, however long. And even like the 6-day losing streak for Palantir was like the most since sometime last year. Which is just kind of goes to show you, even with the 25% pullback, it's still the leader in the S&P 500 for gains this year. So there has been more than enough strength there. Dan Ives today, I was listening to his call or on CNBC, and he was talking about, Palantir's going to $1 trillion market cap, even potentially just on $12 billion in, sales. I don't know what kind of pot he's smoking, but it's something really good apparently, because that's kind of insanity. But again, who am I to judge? He kept using the phrase, in my view. Well, I don't know. Maybe I'm just not that crazy, or maybe that optimistic. But, even if they tripled revenues to then effectively triple stock price, it just, again, doesn't really matter to me. If it gave a clean technical setup and it's in a good group, stocks in its group are acting well, I'm happy to buy it. They probably do grow into their valuation, hopefully at some point, or, when the market comes to its senses, that stock will get re-rated in a really hard way. But in the meantime, like I said, it's hard to judge relative strength, relative weakness, when everything is doing the exact same thing. There are things that aren't moving with the market, and those are very, uncorrelated market names, very low beta, as some people might say. And, your Walmarts and your Costcos, and your MOs and your Philip Morrises of the world. So not really a market that I'm looking to try and quote unquote buy the dip on. Well, should I say I do want to buy the dip, but I want to buy the dip on stocks that are showing relative strength when the market's been showing some weakness potentially. But when everything is moving in lockstep, then that's when I want to be a little bit more careful, because I personally lose some of my own edge, which is scanning the market. But when everything is moving the damn same, it's hard to, make heads from tails, or, apples to apples. It's like everything just looks the same, is acting the same. Some things holding up a little bit better than others. So yeah, we'll kind of see what NVIDIA's earnings bring for us. We'll see what the speech at Jackson Hole brings for us. I am still watching names like Alibaba. We'll see what that one does for us. Obviously, Futu was a big one today. But, nothing super notable out there other than, MC Hammer comes to mind. Can't touch this with what the hell was going on today. Just big bounces everywhere right after the big violent morning sell-off. But ultimately, we'll just continue to take it one day at a time. I do own ARK still, and that was very nice. We were washing out below the 50, and I said in the room, I just kind of have to respect the stop, and we did bounce and close above the 50. Fantastic. I still have CCL, kind of bounced right at the left side peak over here, which it's been kind of holding for months now. I'm almost tired of owning this thing. It's done nothing for a month, but there we go. I still have a roadblock short, still hopeful that we lose the 50, but if we don't, I'm just going to see what happens if we can get up to this gap fill area, and then hopefully stay heavy there. But, if not, I won't stay stubborn. And then I still have my short on QUBT. We will see if these quantum stocks want to go lower. But again, hammer bar, right? And I don't think it's because people love these quantum names. I just think because they were acting like everything else in the market. So we'll see. We'll take it one day at a time. And I will see you guys all for pre-market prep in the morning. Cheers.